The pre-dawn stillness at Carlsbad Army Airfield shattered on May 15, 1943, not by sirens or enemy bombers, but by something far stranger. Beneath a fuel tank on the tarmac, tiny shadows stirred. Within minutes, flames licked upward, metal shrieked as it expanded in the heat, and the New Mexico darkness bloomed orange. The control tower went next, then the wooden barracks, the fire spreading with unnatural speed through a brand-new military installation. Firefighters stood frozen, not from fear but from orders. The base commander watched his facilities incinerate while his men held their hoses at their sides, protecting not lives or property, but secrecy. The arsonists responsible for this disaster weighed less than an ounce each and were equipped with wings. They were Mexican free-tailed bats, each carrying a weapon designed by Harvard's finest minds, and they had just proven that the most ridiculed idea to emerge from America's war effort might actually work. If you're curious how the United States military ended up weaponizing nocturnal mammals, hit that subscribe button, because this story gets stranger with every tactical decision. The dentist's revenge. 14 months earlier, a 60-year-old dental surgeon named Lytle S. Adams steered his car through the New Mexico twilight, his mind still swimming with the spectacle he had just witnessed at Carlsbad Caverns. Millions of bats had poured from the cave mouth in a living tornado, a phenomenon he had traveled from his Pennsylvania practice specifically to observe. The radio crackled, static gave way to voices, and the voices carried news that would reshape his world. Japanese aircraft had struck Pearl Harbor. Thousands of Americans were dead. The Pacific Fleet smoldered in Hawaiian waters. Adams pulled to the roadside. Rage built behind his sternum, that particular fury of a man who believes himself capable of action, in a moment demanding it. While the radio announcer detailed the attack, Adams's thoughts returned to the cave behind him. His brain made a connection that would seem absurd in calmer times, but possessed a certain logic in the white heat of December 7, 1941. Japan's cities were built from wood and paper, structures that would ignite like kindling. Bats sought shelter in the eaves and attics of buildings. Bats numbered in the millions. If each bat carried a small incendiary device on a timer, if those bats were released over Tokyo at dawn when they naturally sought roosts, the mathematics of destruction assembled themselves in his mind. One bomber could carry thousands of bats. Each bat would fly to a separate building. Thousands of fires would ignite simultaneously across a vast area, overwhelming any firefighting response. The Japanese would surrender within weeks, sparing American lives in a protracted island-hopping campaign. Adams didn't consider himself a violent man, but Pearl Harbor had transformed the equation. The bats, he reasoned, represented the perfect delivery system for righteous vengeance. Within 5 weeks, Adams had sketched designs, consulted naturalists, and composed a formal proposal. The document that reached the White House on January 12, 1942, began with a peculiar statement. The bat was the lowest form of animal life, and until now, reasons for its creation have remained unexplained. Adams had found that reason. The bat existed to burn Tokyo to ash. Under normal circumstances, such a proposal from a civilian dentist would have traveled directly to a Pentagon wastebasket. Adams, however, possessed an advantage that most cranks lacked. He knew Eleanor Roosevelt personally, having once taken the First Lady on a demonstration flight for an air taxi service he had founded. Eleanor passed the proposal to her husband. President Franklin D. Roosevelt read it, and against all reasonable expectation, he didn't laugh. Instead, he scrawled a note. "This man is not a nut." The president forwarded the bat bomb concept to the National Defense Research Committee with instructions to investigate its feasibility. By March 1942, the United States military had officially begun studying how to transform nocturnal cave dwellers into incendiary weapons. The project would eventually be designated with the ominous codename X-ray. engineering the impossible. The challenge facing military planners was unprecedented. No existing doctrine covered the weaponization of living creatures as precision delivery systems. The bat bomb concept required solutions to problems that ranged from biology to aerodynamics to miniaturized explosives. Each obstacle demanded innovation, and some of the war's brightest minds found themselves contemplating questions they had never imagined asking. The first problem was procurement. Adams recommended Mexican free-tailed bats, a species abundant in the American Southwest and capable of carrying loads approaching their own body weight. Military personnel descended on Carlsbad Caverns, the very location that had inspired Adams's vision, and began the surreal task of capturing thousands of bats. Nets stretched across cave passages. Technicians worked in darkness, learning to handle creatures that bit, scratched, and defecated with equal enthusiasm. The bats were transported in refrigerated containers, a technique that exploited their biology. When temperatures dropped, the bats entered hibernation, becoming docile cargo rather than panicked animals. The explosive payload presented its own challenge. A Mexican free-tailed bat weighs approximately half an ounce. The incendiary device it carried needed to weigh no more than that, meaning the military required a bomb weighing roughly 15 to 18 grams that could still generate enough heat to ignite wood and paper structures. The task fell to Dr. Louis Fieser, a Harvard chemist who had recently developed a substance that would define modern warfare, napalm. Fieser's creation was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its application. He designed a celluloid capsule filled with napalm gel, a sticky incendiary compound that burned at extreme temperatures and adhered to surfaces, making it nearly impossible to extinguish. The capsule measured roughly an inch in length and contained a time delay fuse. The fuse mechanism used chemistry rather than clockwork. Copper chloride solution was injected into a chamber containing a thin steel wire. The solution corroded the wire slowly and predictably. When the wire finally snapped, a firing pin released, striking nitrous cellulose that would ignite the napalm. The entire device, designated the H2 unit, weighed 17.5 grams. Attaching these miniature firebombs to living animals proved more difficult than anticipated. Early experiments with clips and harnesses failed. The bats struggled against restraints, exhausting themselves before deployment. Fieser's team eventually settled on a solution that was both simple and disturbing. They glued the incendiary capsules directly to the bats' chests using surgical adhesive. The bats could still fly, still navigate, still seek shelter, but they now carried their payload as an extension of their own bodies. The delivery system required equal ingenuity. Engineers designed a bomb casing approximately 5 feet in length, shaped like a standard aerial munition, but hollow. Inside, circular trays stacked in 3 horizontal layers, each tray perforated with compartments that resembled an egg carton. Each compartment would hold 1 hibernating bat. A single bomb casing could accommodate 1,040 bats. The casing was designed to be loaded into a bomber's bay, dropped from altitude, and deployed via parachute to slow its descent. The operational concept was precise. Bombers would approach Japanese cities in the hours before dawn, when bats naturally seek daytime roosts. At an altitude of 5,000 feet, the bomb casings would be released. Parachutes would deploy, slowing the fall and allowing the interior temperature to rise. At 1,000 feet, the casings would open automatically, releasing more than 1,000 bats into the urban environment. The warming air would rouse the bats from hibernation. Disoriented but driven by instinct, they would scatter across a radius of 20 to 40 miles, seeking dark crevices in attics, eaves, and crawl spaces. The bats would roost in structures throughout the target city. The copper chloride would continue corroding the steel wires. At a predetermined time, thousands of H-2 units would ignite simultaneously across the urban landscape. By the time residents or fire watchers discovered the flames, the fires would have established themselves in inaccessible locations. Japanese cities, built predominantly from wood and paper, offered ideal fuel. Firefighting services were already inadequate and poorly equipped. The result, planners calculated, would be conflagrations that would make conventional firebombing raids look restrained. Testing the theory. The first field tests began in May 1943, 18 months after Adams had first proposed his idea. The location was the Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base, a facility adjacent to the caverns that had spawned the entire concept. A team led by Adams and Dr. Fieser assembled on the New Mexico desert, accompanied by military observers, technical specialists, and thousands of bats. Initial drops used dummy incendiaries, inert capsules that simulated the weight and shape of the H-2 units without the fire risk. A B-25 bomber climbed into the pre-dawn sky, carrying bomb casings loaded with hibernating bats. At the designated altitude, the pilot released the payload. Parachutes deployed, the casings descended, opened, and released their cargo. Observers on the ground watched through binoculars as the bats dispersed exactly as predicted, scattering across the landscape and disappearing into buildings on the test range. The test appeared successful. The bats behaved as the models had suggested. They sought shelter in structures rather than flying into open desert. The delivery mechanism worked. The only variable remaining was the incendiary itself. Fieser prepared 6 bats with live H-2 units for a demonstration that would be filmed for military leadership. Cameras were positioned, officers assembled to observe. The bats, dormant in their refrigerated state, were prepared for release. Something went wrong. The exact sequence of events remains disputed in historical accounts, but the outcome was unambiguous. The 6 bats, equipped with functioning incendiaries on time-delay fuses, woke earlier than anticipated. Whether the refrigeration failed, whether the desert heat penetrated their containers, or whether handling disturbed them, the bats became active before the demonstration officially began. They flew, they sought shelter, and they found it in the worst possible locations. One group of bats flew directly toward the wooden control tower. Others roosted beneath the fuel tank on the tarmac. Still others found the barracks, squeezing into gaps in the structure that no human bomber could ever target. The observers likely noticed the escaped bats, but refrigerated bats occasionally woke during handling. It wasn't yet a crisis. Then the timers expired. The fuel tank ignited first. Witnesses described a sudden bloom of flame, napalm burning at temperatures hot enough to make steel glow. The tank itself didn't explode, it melted, releasing its contents to feed the fire already consuming it. The control tower followed, flames racing up the wooden frame faster than men could evacuate it. The barracks contributed their own pyres, multiple structures burning simultaneously, as the incendiaries detonated in sequence. The base commander faced an impossible choice. Standard procedure demanded an immediate firefighting response, but the project was classified at the highest levels. Deploying firefighters meant questions, reports, and potential security breaches. He ordered his men to stand down. They would let the fire burn, sacrificing infrastructure to protect secrecy. For the next several hours, personnel at Carlsbad Army Airfield watched a substantial portion of their brand-new facility transform into ash and twisted metal, all because of 6 bats and some Harvard chemistry. When the flames finally exhausted themselves, the base lay in ruins. The control tower was gone. The fuel tank was a sculpture of warped steel. Barracks had collapsed into smoking foundations. No one had died. No one had even been seriously injured, but the material damage was substantial. The irony was not lost on observers. The bat bomb had achieved exactly what it was designed to do, just against the wrong nation. The Aftermath and Competition. Jack Kufer, who witnessed the disaster and later documented it in his book Bat Bomb, described the incident as an accidental incineration that nonetheless demonstrated the weapon's effectiveness. The military drew the same conclusion. The test was technically a success. 6 bats had destroyed a military installation. Imagine what 140 bats could accomplish against Tokyo or Osaka. The project continued, but it migrated. The Army Air Corps, nursing its burned airfield and damaged pride, transferred Project X-ray to the Navy in August 1943. The Navy, in turn, passed it to the Marines later that year. Under Marine supervision, the bat bomb underwent refinement. Engineers constructed mock Japanese villages at testing ranges in Utah, complete with authentic architectural details and construction materials sourced to match urban Japan. The bats performed admirably in these controlled environments. Drops resulted in a reasonable number of destructive fires, according to the chief of incendiary testing. The report continued, "The main advantage of the units would seem to be their placement within the enemy structures, without the knowledge of the householder or fire watchers, thus allowing the fire to establish itself before being discovered." This was the bat bomb's true innovation. Conventional incendiary raids announced themselves with air raid sirens, giving civilians time to prepare. The bats would infiltrate silently, roost invisibly, and ignite simultaneously across an area too vast for a coordinated response. By the time the fires were detected, they would already be beyond control, nestled in attics and wall spaces where water couldn't reach them. The psychological impact alone might prove decisive. How does a population defend against an enemy that arrives on wings, in darkness, numbering in the thousands? But while little Adams pursued his vision of vengeful mammals, other minds were solving the problem of Japanese resistance through different means. In the deserts of New Mexico, not far from the Carlsbad test range, a separate project was progressing. The Manhattan Project had none of the bat bomb's creativity or biological elegance. It was brute physics, an application of Einstein's equations to uranium and plutonium. It promised not fires in attics, but entire cities vaporized in seconds. The Manhattan Project consumed resources at a staggering rate. Entire towns materialized in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington, dedicated to enriching uranium and producing plutonium. The thermal diffusion plant alone required 2,042 48-foot columns, and that was just one component of a sprawling industrial complex. Compared to this investment, the bat bomb was almost quaint, a project that required caves, refrigeration, and some very patient bat handlers. By late 1943, the atomic bomb's feasibility was becoming clear to those with clearance to know. The theoretical work had been validated, the engineering challenges, while immense, appeared surmountable. The first test reactor at Oak Ridge went operational in January 1944. Plutonium production began. The timeline projected a functioning weapon by mid-1945. The bat bomb, meanwhile, had achieved technical success, but faced a different problem: logistics. Each mission required capturing and maintaining thousands of bats. The creatures needed constant refrigeration. The incendiaries required individual assembly and attachment. The bomb casings were complex mechanisms with parachutes, timers, and temperature-controlled releases. An atomic bomb needed a single bomber, a single weapon, and a clear sky. The operational simplicity was compelling. In October 1944, military leadership in Washington made their decision. Project X-ray was officially terminated. The bat bomb would never see combat. The thousands of hours spent on design, the test flights, the burned airfield, the mock Japanese villages in Utah, all of it was rendered obsolete by uranium-235 and plutonium-239. Lytle Adams's vision of million bat raids died in a memo, filed away as another wartime experiment that didn't survive contact with budgetary and strategic reality. The fire next time. 9 months after Project X-Ray's cancellation, a B-29 superfortress named Enola Gay climbed into the sky above Tinian Island. In its bomb bay sat Little Boy, a uranium weapon representing the culmination of the Manhattan Project's efforts. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the bomb detonated above Hiroshima. The bats would have crept in silently, dispersing across residential areas, starting thousands of small fires that would coalesce into firestorms. The atomic bombs announced themselves like divine judgment, erasing city centers in microseconds. One approach was diffuse, biological, almost medieval in its use of living creatures as weapons. The other was concentrated, technological, and entirely new to human warfare. It's worth considering what might have happened had the bat bomb been ready first. Would military leadership have deployed it? Almost certainly. The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945, using conventional incendiaries, killed approximately 100,000 people in a single night and demonstrated American willingness to target urban areas. The bat bomb would have been merely a more efficient delivery system for the same basic strategy, igniting Japanese cities to force surrender. The ethics of the bat bomb were always complicated. Lytle Adams presented it as a humane alternative to invasion. Compared to the projected casualties of landing troops on the Japanese home islands, estimates ran to hundreds of thousands of American deaths. The bat bomb seemed almost merciful. It targeted infrastructure rather than people directly. The bats would roost in buildings, not bunkers. The fires would spread from structure to structure, giving civilians time to evacuate. Adams genuinely believed his invention would save lives on both sides. This reasoning ignored some uncomfortable realities. Japanese cities weren't just wood and paper. They were homes, occupied by families. The fires wouldn't discriminate between military and civilian targets. The bat bomb's advantage, its ability to start fires in inaccessible locations throughout a city, was also its moral liability. Those fires would be nearly impossible to fight, ensuring maximum destruction. The weapon was designed specifically to exploit the vulnerability of civilian infrastructure. Calling it humane required selective attention to certain outcomes while ignoring others. Dr. Louis Fieser, who designed the H-2 incendiary units, later expressed ambivalence about his wartime work. Napalm, his most famous invention, would burn through the Korean War, Vietnam, and into the modern era, accumulating a legacy far darker than bat-borne incendiaries. The bat bomb was, in some sense, napalm, with a creative delivery system. The morality of the weapon resided not in the bats, but in the fire they carried. Legacy of an absurd war. The bat bomb has become a fixture of strange but true military history, appearing in books, documentaries, and internet articles that present it as evidence of wartime desperation, producing absurd ideas. The project is usually played for laughs, serious military officers discussing bat logistics, Harvard chemists gluing bombs to mammals, the image of a Pennsylvania dentist convincing the president to weaponize cave dwellers. It's inherently comedic. But beneath the absurdity lived genuine innovation. The bat bomb represented early thinking about distributed warfare and biological delivery systems. Modern militaries use drones to achieve what the bats were intended to do: penetrate deep into enemy territory, operate autonomously, and strike targets with precision. A bat carrying an incendiary is conceptually similar to a small drone carrying an explosive charge. Both leverage mobility and autonomy to overcome defenses. The project also demonstrated something about American wartime culture. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, the national mood combined rage, creativity, and a willingness to consider unconventional approaches. The fact that the bat bomb received serious development resources, including participation by leading scientists, reveals how thoroughly the war mobilized intellectual creativity. Not every idea needed to be practical to receive initial support. The urgency of total war created space for experimentation that would seem impossible in peacetime. Lytle Adams never saw his invention used in combat, but he witnessed something arguably more important. He proved the concept worked. The Carlsbad airfield burned because bat bombs functioned as designed. The technical challenges were solved. The operational questions were answered. The only reason the bat bomb didn't incinerate Japanese cities was timing. The atomic bomb arrived first, rendering all conventional and unconventional incendiary weapons obsolete. In the decades since 1945, the bat bomb has been reassessed periodically, usually in the context of what-if alternative history. If the Manhattan Project had failed or been delayed, would bat bombs have preceded the invasion of Japan? The technical capacity existed by late 1944. Production could have scaled to provide weapons for hundreds of bombers. The strategic rationale, forcing surrender through urban destruction, was already accepted doctrine, as the Tokyo firebombing proved. Some historians argue the bat bomb would have been less catastrophic than the atomic weapons actually used. The fires would have been terrible, but they would have spread over hours rather than detonating in seconds. Civilian casualties might have been lower, evacuation more feasible. This perspective assumes the bat bomb would have been used once or twice, and then war would have ended. But military logic suggests otherwise. If bat bombs had been available and effective, they would have been employed repeatedly against multiple cities until Japan surrendered or the bat supply was exhausted. The environmental considerations never entered wartime calculations, but they're worth noting in retrospect. Each bat bomb mission would have killed thousands of Mexican free-tailed bats, a species now recognized as ecologically important for insect control. The bats would have been captured from caves, disrupting colonies that numbered in the millions, then deployed as single-use weapons. Modern conservation ethics would find this approach horrifying, but 1940s military planners operated under different frameworks. The bats were resources to be exploited, no different from steel or gasoline. The inventor's perspective, Lytle Adams spent the rest of his life defending his invention. He gave interviews, wrote articles, and maintained correspondence with military historians. His position never wavered. The bat bomb was a good idea, poorly timed. Had it been deployed, it would have ended the war with fewer casualties than the atomic bombs, the firebombing campaigns, or an invasion. He believed this sincerely, and nothing in the subsequent historical record convinced him otherwise. There's a poignancy to Adams's persistence. He was a dentist who saw a natural phenomenon and connected it to a national crisis. His idea was creative, technically feasible, and strategically sound within the context of total war. He navigated military bureaucracy, convinced skeptics, and saw his concept developed by leading scientists. The bat bomb worked. It just didn't work in time. Adams died in 1984, having lived long enough to see his invention become a historical curiosity rather than a serious weapon. The bats he once envisioned as instruments of vengeance returned to their ecological role, consuming insects in the New Mexico desert. Carlsbad Caverns became a national treasure rather than a munitions source. The infrastructure Adams helped create, the containment systems, the refrigeration techniques, the handling protocols, was dismantled or repurposed. Dr. Fieser's trajectory was different. His wartime work on napalm continued into the post-war era, and he witnessed his creation used in conflicts he likely never anticipated. Napalm in Korea, napalm in Vietnam. Images of burning villages and fleeing children became symbols of American military excess. Fieser expressed regret in later years, though he maintained that his wartime service had been necessary. The bat bomb was a footnote in his career, a brief collaboration on a project that never saw combat. The napalm was his legacy, for better or worse. The unburned cities. Tokyo today is a metropolis of steel, glass, and concrete, one of the world's largest urban centers. The wooden structures that made it vulnerable to bat bombs were destroyed during the war, though not by bats. Conventional firebombing raids achieved the destruction that Adams's invention promised. The city burned, was rebuilt, and became something entirely different from what existed in 1945. It's impossible to know what Tokyo would look like if bat bombs had been the primary American incendiary weapon. Perhaps the physical outcome would have been identical: ruins and ash, followed by reconstruction. Perhaps the psychological impact would have differed. There is something particularly unsettling about the idea of thousands of incendiary-laden bats infiltrating a city, roosting invisibly, and then igniting in coordinated fashion. The randomness of where each bat landed, the impossibility of predicting which buildings would burn, might have created a different kind of terror than raids by formations of B-29s. Or perhaps it would have made no difference. War reduces such distinctions to academic exercises. The cities burned. People died. The method, whether high-explosive bombs, incendiary clusters, atomic weapons, or bat-delivered napalm, mattered less than the outcome. Japan surrendered. The war ended. The specific technologies employed became material for historians rather than strategic considerations. The bat bomb's cancellation meant that one particular horror was never realized, though plenty of others were. The bats remained in their caves. The H-2 incendiaries were never mass-produced. The elaborate bomb casings with their parachutes and temperature controls stayed on drawing boards or in warehouses, eventually scrapped or forgotten. Project X-ray left behind documentation, some photographs, and the charred remains of Carlsbad Army Airfield as its only tangible legacy. Epilogue: When Absurdity Works. The story of the bat bomb challenges comfortable assumptions about military innovation. We prefer to believe that successful weapons are serious, dignified, developed by sober-minded professionals working from established principles. The bat bomb was none of these things. It emerged from a dentist's vacation, relied on mammalian behavior, and required gluing napalm to living creatures. It should have been laughed out of the room. Instead, it received development funding, scientific support, and field testing. It worked. Not perfectly and not without setbacks, the Carlsbad fire being the most spectacular, but it functioned. Bats carried incendiaries. They dispersed across target areas. They roosted in buildings. The fires ignited. The concept was validated. The bat bomb failed not because it was ridiculous, but because something more effective arrived first. This distinction matters. Military history is filled with unconventional weapons that failed in development or testing. The bat bomb succeeded in development and testing. It was operationally ready by late 1944. Its cancellation was strategic, not technical. There's a lesson here about dismissing ideas based on initial appearances. The bat bomb sounded insane when Adams first proposed it. It continued to sound insane through years of development. Even after the Carlsbad fire demonstrated its effectiveness, it still sounded insane. But insane doesn't mean ineffective. Sometimes the absurd idea works, and then you have to decide whether you're willing to deploy it. The United States decided the answer was no, but only because the atomic bomb provided an alternative. Had uranium enrichment proven impossible, had the Trinity test failed, had any of a dozen technical hurdles defeated the Manhattan Project, the bat bomb would have been ready. Bombers would have carried them over Japanese cities. The bats would have dispersed, roosted, and burned. We remember the bat bomb as a curiosity because it never happened, but it nearly did. That near miss is what makes the story worth preserving. For a brief period in the 1940s, The United States military seriously planned to weaponize Mexican free-tailed bats as incendiary delivery systems. Engineers solved the problems, scientists designed the payloads, test pilots flew the missions. And when armed bats accidentally incinerated an airfield in New Mexico, proving the concept worked, the military brass looked at the burning ruins and saw not failure, but potential. They were wrong to pursue it, perhaps. The ethics were questionable, the logistics complex, the whole endeavor faintly ridiculous. But they weren't wrong about the engineering. The bat bomb would have worked. Little Adams, the Pennsylvania dentist who conceived the idea while driving home from a cave tour, had figured out a genuinely effective weapon. He just had the misfortune of completing it in the same years that physicists were splitting atoms. The bats returned to Carlsbad Caverns, where tourists now watch them emerge at dusk, a natural spectacle rather than a military resource. The napalm formulas were archived. The bomb casings were dismantled. Project X-ray disappeared into classified files and eventually into declassified history. But for those 15 minutes, when Carlsbad Army Airfield burned, when officers watched their new base consumed by fires started by 6 bats and some Harvard chemistry, the absurd idea was terrifyingly real. The mocking stopped. The bat bomb worked. It just worked too late, and against the wrong target. The flash was visible for miles. The blast wave shattered buildings across the city center. The fireball reached temperatures exceeding those at the sun's surface. Approximately 70,000 people died instantly. 3 days later, Nagasaki experienced similar devastation from a plutonium implosion device. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The atomic bombs accomplished what the bat bombs had promised, the rapid conclusion of the Pacific War. But the methods differed profoundly.